Welcome to the Cook the Books podcast by Tea with Coffee Media. I'm Tyler Witkowski, the president and publisher of Tea with Coffee Media.
And I'm Kelsey Ann Lovelady, the vice president of marketing.
Back in 2021, we took our experience as independent authors and used it to create a publishing company with our friends. Our mission is to help other indie authors reach more and greater success.
This podcast is dedicated to helping authors find the perfect recipe to create their books and their persona as an author. We talk about everything from plotting to character creation to marketing to using your life experiences to create your unique voice and stories.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome back to the Cook the Books podcast, where you've got me, Tyler Witkowski, the president and publisher of Tea with Coffee Media, who loves Linktree and Linktree loves him, and my best friend,
Kelsey Ann Lovelady, the vice president of marketing, who also loves Linktree.
And today we are joined by our very own editor, Sarah Sanders. We're so glad to have you here, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Kelsey, how are you? How are things going?
Oh, I still have to work a day job, and right now outside it is very cloudy. We are set to have like 77% chance of snow, so we'll see if I'm driving into the office tomorrow, but if the roads are too bad, I'm just going to tell them, yeah, no, I'm not risking that.
Yeah, don't blame you. Don't blame you.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, I'm busy, between running two businesses, two blogs, and my own writing, but I did finish the Principles a couple weeks ago, and I'm working on Sunflower Kisses book 2, Love and Growth, for NaNoWriMo, and I'm hoping to have that done, and it will be my longest novel at over 70,000 words. So, yeah,
we love
excited.
And how are you,
Kels?
Sarah?
Oh, I'm great. It's beautiful. I'm in Oregon, so the leaves are at the height of their vividness, and it's gorgeous. I'm loving this time of year over here.
Jealous. Our leaves are all brown, crunchy, and
That's how it was where I grew up, and that's why I moved up here. I wanted somewhere where fall is pretty.
Exactly.
All right, let's jump into our hot topic. Kels, kick us off. This was you sent me some TikTok videos on this, and it kind of blew my mind, the first one I watched. So I'm gonna let you take the lead on this one.
Boy, boy, this one is a doozy. Okay, I opened my TikTok Monday morning, and I am immediately bombarded with a bunch of book talk videos about a particular author by the name of Tilly Cole. Now, the reason why she's in the book talk news at the moment is because she wrote a romance story where the love interest is a former member of a group of people who have very strong opinions and an affinity for wearing pointy hoods. Now, the reason why she was really in the news at the time is because there were several members of Book Talk who are going, this book has insanely high ratings. Why? Why are people reading this, and why are people liking it? So right now she's dealing with a lot of pushback for making the love interest of her story an individual that most women in the real world who are well-adjusted, such as those of us present, probably would not like. So yes, that is the hot topic right now in Book Talk, is this particular British author, not American, British author. Yeah, it's it's interesting.
I heard about this, but I didn't realize she was British. That adds a whole other layer.
Yeah, it really, really does. Now, like, I'm an erotica and romance author myself, and yes, the love interests that we write about and like to read about, they're not always the most savory of characters. Sometimes they're mafia bosses who have killed people. Sometimes they're full serial killers, again, who have killed people. But there is still
Or a minotaur.
Or a minotaur, as Tyler and I know full well. But there's still kind of a line of don't screw with men who are racist at the top of the list. Yeah, that's a really hard limit for a lot of women in this day and age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think tone deaf doesn't even, there are no words, like you need another descriptor that goes beyond tone deaf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So many steps in the process of creating a book like that. Could you have gotten feedback saying this is harmful and acted on it? That's wild.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, did she get beta readers, and if so, or sensitivity readers? Because I feel like that's the first. If I was writing a story that had a former or current or whatever, some relation to the Pointy Hat Boys, then I would definitely get a sensitivity reader to make sure that I wasn't crossing any lines. And it sounds like, I mean, I personally haven't read the book. I've seen some of the reviews and I've seen some of the TikTok videos on Book Talk, but it sounds like she really did cross the line. And I think that might be why so many people are reading it now, which is the bad thing about our society, is that if we hear something controversial, people rush out to buy it, and that does nothing, but to help further that author's cause and make them feel like, oh well, this book hit a bestseller, this book is getting XYZ ratings, when people are just buying it to see what all the outrage. Like I want to read it to see what it's like, but I don't want to buy it per se because I don't want to waste my money on something like that.
The thing that absolutely blows my mind is this is not an isolated incident. It's not like one very ill-informed author does this like once every blue moon. I can recall maybe as recently as 3 to 5 years ago, not probably even more recently than that, there was an author on Twitter who the synopsis of her book was on like that publisher's like auction site where you can like read the synopsis of a book so that publishers can like bid on whether they want it or not. And the way she described it is it was a love story where the love interest was a German prisoner of war from World War II. There's a word for that. And it rhymes with Yahtzee.
No, oh no.
I don't understand it. Like, I am a sucker for a bad boy. Certain bad boys. Again, I will even screw with the right serial killer. But not a German prisoner of war or a guy who even at one time, maybe doesn't anymore, but even at one time had like saw a pointy hood and a cross on fire and said, I want to do that. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't get what is so difficult to not get about like, how do you even get here in the first place? At what point in the thought process did this sound like a good idea to you?
Yeah, I think the trick is there's a line between morally gray, as in a morally gray individual, and actions or organizations in this case that are actively doing harm to entire communities. That's the difference. Like, sure, I might fall for a bad boy in a novel who is individually engaging in heinous acts, but he's not harming communities. I think that's the issue. And when you don't consult with those communities before you write the book, you become the next book talk drama.
Yeah.
And that's a great point because my latest book that's coming out in March, the Principles, it's all about the first female principal in a rural 1980s county. And I obviously am not a woman. I was born after the 1980s, and I was doing this based off of stories that I heard from my grandma. And we chose the editor for this book specifically because she would have been a high school student at the time of the book, so she had a better understanding of that. And then the next person who's going to read it is going to be a woman, and then the next person is going to be my grandma, who the story is based off of. So I'm doing like 3 layers to make sure I'm accurately portraying, because like I said, I'm not a woman. I don't know how certain things are perceived, or how certain things, I want to make it as authentic as possible and get that feedback, because you want to make sure you're not offending anybody. Like, why would you? And I feel like some people intentionally try to offend people, and it's like, why would you do that?
And it's
Yeah.
not even like offending people that you've got to be careful of. You've got to be careful of idolizing, damaging people and ideals, which is exactly what these books are doing. They're making it like, oh, we're humanizing the people who did this. And yes, there are people who were a part of that same group who have since left and said, I regret everything I did. Cool. Doesn't make them a romantic interest.
Yeah, there you go. Because there's nothing wrong with portraying someone who has done harm and then repented. I think, or, learned better. I think those are worthy stories of being told. But yeah, when you take that type of person and make them a romantic interest, that sends a different message. Yeah,
A
people
completely
forget
different
that art
message.
is political by nature, and you can't just go, well, this is just my art. This is just, my opinion. No, it's political whether you want it to be or not. So
Exactly.
you gotta do your due diligence, like Tyler said.
Minimum.
Minimum. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's bring this hot topic to an end before we burn the kitchen down. And let's take a quick break, jump over to a Tea with Coffee Media ad. And, because we don't have any sponsors yet, but we are sponsors. So Linktree, if you're watching this, Nikki, sponsor us. Side note. Anyway, we'll be right back for our next topic of the day, editing. Why does it suck? So until we come back.
All right.
Hey everybody, my name is Tyler Witkowski. I am the publisher and founder of Tea with Coffee Media.
I can't believe I did this! I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I did this!
I am a 9-year Navy vet. The Navy kind of broke me in the process, so I am a disabled vet as well.
Games like The Sims or Skyrim, making my character and putting them in this world and seeing how they would traverse this stuff.
I today am signing a contract with Tea with Coffee Media.
Your friends, soon you won't have any.
What are you, a fortune cookie?
And we're back. Still no word from Linktree, but I'll call them later. We're going to jump into our topic, though, with Kelsey and Sarah. We're especially excited to have Sarah. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, she is one of the editors at Tea with Coffee Media. So before we jump into the topic, Sarah, I want you to introduce to our listeners a little bit about your editing background and, plug any of your services that you do on the side.
Thank you very much. I am so pleased to have in the past year transitioned to editing creative work and novels. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of academic editing, which was a great way to stay home with my son and work and do what I love, which is editing, but man, was it a drag. So I started to take my ability to edit more seriously after I wrote my first novel, Soulmates, a metaphysical love story. And then I started dipping my toe into the creative space editing, and I love it so much. So happy to be on board with y'all because it has given me the opportunity to really flex my editing muscles. And I still do freelance editing and occasionally beta reading on the side.
And
Very
we're happy to
nice.
have you.
Well,
We're happy to have you on the team.
yes, Kelsey
you
stole
so
the
much.
words right out of my mouth. We love having Sarah as part of our team, and we actually, it's funny because we were just talking about Book Talk, and that's how we found Sarah, was through Book Talk. She had put up a TikTok looking for clients, and we were in need of an editor, so we reached out to her, went through the interview process, and here she is. So
That is just
let's
amazing how that happened.
yeah,
It's a Book Talk miracle.
It is.
they do happen. All right,
They
let's jump into today's topic. So first off, Kelsey, I want to ask you this question because, as Sarah, you're playing the editor today and taking off your writer hat and putting on your editor hat. Kelsey, you're wearing the writer hat for me. So what are the main challenges that writers face, Kelsey, during the book editing process?
So I personally enjoy the self-editing process because sometimes I forget what I've written sometimes, and I look at myself and I go, I'm a damn genius sometimes. But I can see why other authors don't like the editing process, because sometimes it can be evidence that your imposter syndrome is correct and that you're terrible at what you do and that you're a terrible writer. So that's, I think, the big obstacle that people face with self-editing and even working with a professional editor. When they see all the corrections and just red everywhere, they're like, I shouldn't do this as a job.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true for me too. But I tell people all the time, especially because my day job is, or what I do aside from Tea with Coffee Media, is marketing communications. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, I'll write your blog for you, but I'm gonna have to get somebody to edit it because I can write. I can write with the best of them, I feel like. But grammar and sentence structure and all that stuff, way out of my realm of expertise. That's why, like, I'll go through and do self edits, for basic things, what Pro Writing Aid tells me needs to be changed, and things like that. But that's why we rely on people like Sarah. So, Sarah, what is the main challenge that you face during the book editing process as an editor?
I think one of the biggest things is managing expectations, because every writer has their own expectations and, like both of you pointed out, their own fears and insecurities. So one of the biggest things for me is figuring out, okay, what is technically incorrect and what is just the author's style, because there are some aspects of style that are not technically correct, but you don't want to steal the author's voice out from under them. So I just think the communication process of, hey, do you enjoy starting sentences with the word and? That's a big one, where some people would say, oh, that's technically incorrect. But that's just part of some people's writing style. And even if it's technically incorrect, if it contributes to the style, leave it, So I think managing expectations and then balancing that with editing, not just for technicalities, but thinking from a reader perspective of what is going to be confusing to a reader, even though it sounds beautiful. And how do I help the writer preserve the beauty of this, but also say, hey, 50% of your readers aren't going to understand this at all. How can we change that? Finding that middle ground, that balance.
Yeah. Which that brings me to another good question. What are some common unrealistic expectations that writers may have whenever it comes to the editing process?
I think time is a big one. I think some people want to rush the process so much. They think, okay, as soon as I finish my first draft, I'll send it off to an editor and I'm going to be published in a month, and I think maybe they don't realize, then they get the manuscript back and there's lots of red marks, and it can be very overwhelming. So yeah, probably time and just the expectation of there's not going to be that many edits. I'm a great writer. So you can be a great writer and still not see certain aspects of your own writing clearly because you're just too close to it.
Kelsey, that leads me to my next point. I mean, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how does self-doubt and imposter syndrome impact writers during the editing journey? And what strategies have you learned to overcome this imposter syndrome during the editing process? Not necessarily your self-editing process because you enjoy that, but whenever it goes off to somebody like Sarah or Heidi or Abby, and they're going through and you go through and see all the red marks. How do you overcome that self-doubt and that imposter syndrome?
I think it requires a level of detachment, which is a very weird thing to tell authors because when we write a book, we're essentially making a baby. That's why it's called a book baby, because we've gone through goodness knows how many hours of labor bringing this thing to life. And there's a point where you have to say, this is not a personal attack on me. This is not the editor saying I'm a bad writer. This is them saying your book will be better if you change this. And we should all strive for improvement. And the beautiful thing that I find with working with editors like Sarah, like Victoria, is I can look through their edits and I can start to notice a pattern of like, seems to be a consistent problem that I have. So in the future, I make that mistake less and less and less until it's almost out of my work completely. And that's a good benefit. You're essentially being taught how to be a better writer the first time around so that you have fewer edits in the future for your next project.
Yeah. Sarah, what, dealing with the fine line, I don't know if you guys can hear my dog whining, but Dutch,
No.
you're interrupting the podcast, bro. Anyway, thanks. What are some frustrations that, and this doesn't have to be personal experience, you don't have to name any names, but what are some frustrations that editors might encounter when they're working with writers? And like I said, I mean, you can pull from personal experience, but if you've never had a difficult writer, what are some things that you've been afraid of or you've heard of from your editing community?
I would say there's a few. Sending a rough draft and expecting a polished draft afterward. That can be kind of tricky because if you run into whole sections that need to be rewritten or rethought, it can be tricky to manage expectations. Another thing is getting a manuscript that does deal with really sensitive issues, and this kind of relates to our hot topic, that clearly has not been read by beta readers or sensitivity readers, and then having to approach the author about that, especially if you're not marketing yourself as a sensitivity reader, you may still feel that you need to say something, and that can be tricky. And sort of related to that too is trigger warnings. We have to remember that editors are people with trauma also. So just kind of a little warning about triggers is always helpful and kind in any case, I would say.
Kelsey, how can miscommunication between writers and editors hinder the editing process? I've had plenty of editors in my time, and I know like communication is key, and I always appreciate not good feedback, but a good timely feedback, getting it not necessarily in a, just communication, I guess. How is that important to the whole process?
So it's a good thing that you bring this up because when we actually interview our authors, when they send us submissions, we ask them, what is the best way to communicate with you, especially with edits? Do you want a compliment sandwich? Do you want to be on an actual call with the editor before you actually look through the edits? And speaking as someone with autism, it benefits me to have a call with the editor before I actually look at the edits, because when I just see a whole bunch of red marks, that is the thing that makes me go, "Aye." But having the conversation with the editor going, "I like this story. You need to fix this, but this is brilliant." That helps, and it helps a lot. And I think just knowing who you are and what you need out of communication is a big hurdle, because we're always trying to figure out who we are. We're always trying to find ourselves and understand ourselves. But the moment that you do, just let people know what you need and see if they can accommodate for you.
Sarah, what about you? I mean, on the editor side, what are some of the ways miscommunication can really mess up or hinder the editing process?
I think a big one is knowing what type of editing you need. And this is probably more common when someone's brand new to writing, and especially if your story is a very complex story, say it's a high fantasy, not realizing that they may need developmental edits before they go to a line editor. That can be difficult, because if they're just expecting line edits, but the editor runs into developmental issues and they weren't expecting that kind of feedback, that can be tricky to deal with. So I'd say that's a biggie.
Why is finding the right editor so crucial for the success of a book, Sarah?
Oh man, the right editor can go beyond just grammatical correctness and word choice, and they can make your work pop for your reader. Like, I'm thinking of a particular project I had where it was an excellent novel that I was editing, but the writer just had trouble with action scenes, and the action beats were very disjointed. And knowing that going in, that was kind of an insecurity of his, and being able to get into a reader's shoes when editing that and knowing how it would be most impactful, the right editor can take those kinds of scenes and make them impactful, not just grammatically correct, but really pop for a reader. And from a reader standpoint also, I personally have a lot of trouble reading books that are poorly edited or unedited, and that's totally a personal thing. Not everyone feels that way. And I honestly think that grammatical correctness, it's a social construct, it's made up. But personally, and I know I'm not the only one, when I'm reading a book, I want it to be polished. It makes it easier for me to get into the story. So that's why I always say that having someone edit your book, even though it does represent an investment, I think it's a worthy investment for anyone who is able to make it, for sure.
Kelsey, what risks do writers face when settling for subpar editing services? Just going for the cheapest option instead of weighing out, trying to find the right editor?
Unfortunately, you run the risk of being immortalized for all the wrong reasons. Your book is going to be out there on record being full of easy to have fixed typos and grammatical errors and even just the smallest of things. And that's the last thing that you want to do, is get a reputation for being a lazy author or an author who just did not put the time and effort into your project that it frankly deserves. Yes, we put in hours just creating it, but again, it's a baby. You put in hours growing this child, birthing it. You don't then just drop it off and say, good luck. You put time into raising it. You put time into helping it develop as a person, as a character, as a member of society, so that they can do good in the world and so that they can be happy. You have to do the same thing with your book. The work does not stop once you hit the end. The work continues on and continues on. And that's, I think, where people maybe have the wrong idea that once you type the end, the hard work is done. It's not. You keep working hard, and you have to keep working hard.
So, Sarah, as a writer and an editor, how does editing differ from the creative process of writing?
Well, it differs quite a bit because for me, and I know I'm not the only writer, writing is all about the flow. It's all about the feel. It's about the muse. I can sit in my jammies and, have a drink next to me and write and feel, it's about the feelings for me. But then when you switch into self-editing mode, it's looking for problems. It's getting into the reader perspective and thinking, okay, a real person is going to read this. That can be terrifying. If they're nitpicking my work, what would they find? And then turning into a nitpicker. And I think, Kelsey, when you said that a level of detachment is necessary, that's really key. Especially because there's just certain things about our own writing that we won't notice because it's ours, so that's why I always send my books off to a professional editor, even though I am a professional editor, because I know that there's blind spots that I have in my writing. Because when I'm reading it, I hear my own voice in my head reading it back to me, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. I get it. Of course I get it. I wrote it, but someone else is going to go, I see what you're doing here, but not everyone else is going to. So it's definitely a big shift, and that detachment is important if you don't want to just be sad the whole time.
Exactly. And because you've been with this project since the day that it was starting to be conceived from the first word, I remember I think it must have been a Tumblr post that said something to the effect of, you've read your book 12,000 times. Of course it feels predictable. You're not reading it from a fresh eyes perspective. So your brain is lying to you sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You just get too close to it. Yeah,
you do.
And it can blind you to the good things and the bad things because you're just too close. You got to have outside perspectives.
Precisely.
Yeah, and then you don't become
All
a
right.
book farm also.
Final question for both of you. All right. Let's start with Kelsey. Your number one tip that writers can use to navigate the editing journey a little more smoothly.
The professional edit is mandatory. So start saving your money, because you get what you pay for. And it is worth investing a pretty penny into your book.
Yeah.
Sarah, what about you? Your number one tip?
My number one tip, that's crucial. And I would say do your research, look around for the right editor for you, and don't be afraid to ask for a free sample edit. Ask, hey, if I send you 1,000 words or 2,000 words, could you give me a free sample edit? Because there are editors out there who will charge you and then just run your manuscript through Grammarly and send it back to you. And that would be disastrous. So ask for a free sample edit. It doesn't hurt to ask. And then you can be really confident going into the editing process.
Absolutely. And just as a reminder, Tea with Coffee Media does not charge their authors for any editing, for any book formatting, for any cover design services. All of that comes complimentary. We pay for that. But if you want to go the self-publishing route, we do offer our services to self-published authors. Our editing service, you could get a book edited by Sarah through us or any of our other great editors. So be sure you visit our website at teawithcoffee.media and check out our services section under the shop tab. And if you're interested, fill out a form. It's no obligation. You just fill out the form and we'll get with you. And we do free sample edits for all of our potential customers. And, we do everything we can to make it as comfortable as possible. But I appreciate everybody's time, especially you, Sarah. and Kelsey, you guys have been great. Any last words for our audience, Sarah?
Editing doesn't have to suck if you prepare in advance and find the right editor.
I love it. Kelsey, what about you? Any last words?
Your brain lies to you. So be willing to get the second opinion.
Very good. All right. Well, and that brings us to the end of the editing. Why does it suck? Well, according to Sarah, it really doesn't. Of the Cook the Books podcast, we appreciate your time. And until next time, see ya.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Cook the Books podcast by Tea with Coffee Media. Interested in supporting this podcast and our independent press?
Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok to stay updated with all the latest Tea with Coffee Media updates.
You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter by visiting teawithcoffee.media.
Finally, visit our Patreon to get early access to the Cook the Books podcast, free access to all Tea with Coffee Media ebooks, and the chance to win cool prizes.
You've been listening to the Cook the Book podcast with me, Tyler Witkowski.
And me, Kelsey Ann Lovelady. Until
next
next time.